spear, sword, several other weapons, and your taijutsu have in common? Well, if you're in the art of ninjutsu, we're going to answer that during this episode of Warriors Whiteboard Wednesday. Shoshi Miller here. Shinoshi, I haven't been a Shoshi for a long time. Daishihan Miller here. Wow, had a little gap there. Anyway, so if you're just joining in, welcome. So today's episode is part one of a two-part episode where we're going to be looking at three ranges in weapons combat. First part we need to get is that there's more than three ranges when it comes to weapons, combat, whatever, okay? The more of these things that we can handle and understand how things fit, the better off we're going to be. Do you have to know it? No, of course not. There's a whole bunch of thugs out there doing whatever it is they do. They're producing results, and things seem to be working out until they don't, right? But either way, okay? So three ranges. What we're going to be doing during this one, during part one, is taking a look at weapons and how they fit into those ranges, but ultimately how they all tie in to a common denominator, right? So if you stay all the way to the end, you'll get how this whole thing wraps up. And then we'll also take a look at, maybe joining us in on this Friday's virtual training via Zoom, where if you're not in the dojo, you can take a look at how this kind of stuff all goes together in a real world example, with the actual training. Anyway, so let's start with this, right? I want to start with a not really a problem, but more of a comparison, okay? And again, this is based on my experience and the experience of a lot of my peers, because way back in the day, right? 1980, a little bit before that, a little bit after that, most of the people that came to this art, 9 out of 10 people that walked in that dojo door had prior martial arts, combat, that kind of experience, okay? The common denominator for most of us is we felt that something was missing. And when we saw what Ninjutsu had to offer, at least back then, right, we all decided we'd take a look, okay? In today's world, 9.8% of the people that walk in that dojo door have no martial arts experience outside of watching, I don't know, the Karate Kid or Power Rangers or MMA fights or whatever, right? They're more of a spectator and they're interested that way. Anyway, but based on my experience, take a look at how weapons kind of fit into overall training, right? Between the way it's typically done and the way history shows us that ours were done. So when I say that ninjutsu is kind of ass backwards, it's not just different. Well, I hate using the word style. Style to me is a bad word, right? But it's not just different in application, approach, and things like that. The way it developed is different. It's backwards from what people normally see, right? From a spiritual perspective, from a physical combat perspective, all that, right? So the way I experienced it, right, is we had our, we'll call it our unarmed, right, fighting skills, whatever. Okay, so we had our unarmed fighting skills, and then as we're working on getting our black belt or whatever, there might be things depending on the schools that I was in, depending on the art, a lot of factors, the teacher's preference and all that, right? It could have been on the way to black belt. It could have been after black belt, where it was in the curriculum, or in a lot of cases, it was stuff that you could add on, right? It was like the optional part of training, right? You go to workshops or decide you were going to choose a weapon here or there. In one or two programs, we had to choose a weapon, that kind of thing, right? So then what ends up happening is your weapons training, right, becomes an add-on, right? So maybe we add nunchucks, maybe we add sword, maybe long staff, whatever, right? But it becomes an add-on. Okay. And so what we ended up doing, I've talked about this in the past, right? During this phase of the training, right? This was almost like it was split into three different sections, right? So I don't know if you can relate or not, but we had like forms training, right? So kata, right? Usually done solo. Okay. And so it had one look to it. It had one feel to it, right? And then we had self-defense. We had a self-defense portion of our class, right? And it looked completely different, right? It was very often where it was hands-on or whatever, right? And so we're doing wrist locks and pressure points and things like that, right? But it didn't look anything like the forms training. there might be a punch that slipped in or a kick that slipped in or whatever that, you'd see here, but these two look completely different. And then we had sparring, right? And that didn't look like either of these. Yeah, but Sensei, we're using the same punches, the same. Yeah, I get it, right? But what's going on, right? Why does it feel like I'm doing three different things to learn this art? Or not three different things, right? Because forms are examples, self-defense application, obviously, right? Goshin, and then sparring, right? Real time, under pressure, right? Against somebody else who gets to resist and all that kind of stuff, right? But they don't look anything alike, okay? But if this stuff is actually supposed to be working, why is there such a disconnect, right? So I'll cover that in other episodes. But on top of that, right, you got this going on, and then I add on a weapon. It has its own stances. It has its own, it's like it's a whole different world, right? Looks very, very little like this in here. Some styles a little bit more, most not, right? Add on another weapon. Well, shit, there's a disconnect between the weapons. There's a disconnect between the body movement, right? What gives, okay? What really attracted me, and I can't speak for most of my peers, but the ones that are still doing it, there must be something in it, right? What attracted us was we've got this realm, right? Okay. Now I'm not gonna use the term ninjutsu, right? I'm gonna use the term ninpo just as kind of a blanket kind of thing here, right? I could write taijutsu in here as a place to start, right? Ninpo taijutsu, or from the ninja no hachimon, ninja no taijutsu, right? So the ninja's body art, the ninja's body skills, those kind of things, right? So what we find is that the forms, there's very few forms, sanshin, whatever. All forms can be done solo, but even the sanshin leads to partner exercises and things like that, right? But 99.8% of the kata, the forms in Ninpo Taijutsu, are self-defense, right? They're a self-defense application. You have you as the defender and one or more attackers. So it's a scenario-based kind of thing, as opposed to something and then something else and then whatever, right? It's all tied together, okay? And then when we're doing sparring, randori, whatever you want to call it, right? We should be moving around and applying things based on the kamae and things like that. Do I know that there's a lot of people who don't, right? As soon as they switch to randori, they start jumping around like a jackrabbit on hot coals and stuff. Yeah, of course, right? Not my fault, right? But evasion, all that kind of stuff, right? So we walk people through this category, right? I think there's a past Whiteboard Wednesday where I go through these 5 levels of sparring training that we do with folks, right? To get them to go from kamae evasion with counter strikes, uke nagashi, counter or evasion, counter strike, counter. It's not really a counter attack. It's an unbalancing, right? And then we do this little skip over kind of thing where we go back to level 1, but people aren't allowed to use their hands, okay? To make sure that they're not like getting all upper body oriented when taijutsu's from the ground up, right? And then level 5 is what most people jump into right off the bat. But by level 5, their sparring should look a whole lot like everything else they've been doing. Of course, they're not going to do memorized kata. They're going to be able to string their basics together in a logical flow against whatever's going on. So it doesn't look radically different, right? So first thing is we get rid of all this. But, right, weapons, change color here so it all matches out, right? Weapons, it's not, you're going to see this in a minute, right? This looks like I just added things in, or that weapons are in here just as a natural extension. There's a lot of people in this art as well that look at weapons like this. The problem is that, 1, it takes longer, and 2, it's historically inaccurate. It's just flat out historically inaccurate, okay? And the reason for that is our Ninpo Taijutsu is based on weapons, not weapons got added on after, okay? So let's take a look at a couple of historical frameworks before we look at these ranges, Okay, I promise it'll all tie together. Okay, so if we think about ancient Japanese history, right? So most people get it, right? Long stabs. I mean, long stabs, or what most people know of as a rokushakubo or a jo or whatever, would have been used on a battlefield, but not as a first preference, right? Not unless you were some poor farmer that suddenly got drafted and you grabbed a stick and ran off and, you were defending the village or whatever. That's not the way it worked, okay? Nobody in their right friggin' mind would take just a stick, spear, halberd, that kind of thing, right, and cut somebody or stab somebody from a distance. Absolutely, right? But just long staff, okay? And I know how people have their favorites, except warriors, you don't have the luxury of having favorites, okay? Because if that's not available and that's where you put all of your energy and all your training, and you're only so-so with these other things, you better hope to Christ you either have that as a weapon as your primary. 2, it doesn't get broken, or 3, the fight doesn't come from a different direction, and you require a different skill set. Okay, so, but a little bit of history. I'm not going to go into dates. You can Google this stuff and look it up, right? But prior to the Huns invading Japan, okay, look this up, right? After they kicked the Huns out of Japan, that's when the seat of government moved from Kamakura, right, where I take students to see the big Buddha, right, along the bay and all that, right? Moved to Kyoto, okay? Moved to Kyoto. A whole bunch of things that happened after that, how warriors got paid, all kinds of stuff, right? But before that, the Japanese did not put a lot of emphasis on like spear and halberd in the ranks, right, of an army on a battlefield, okay? Those kind of things, especially the halberd, was relegated to like women's self-defense, okay? Back in the village where they might be guarding everything from bandits, invaders, whatever, okay? So they did, after the Huns came in, right? And the Huns had entire front rows, right? Rows back, okay? Of polearm fighters, right? And they had to adjust to that. They rethought their strategy, okay? So we're going to take a look at from that period forward, okay? And again, this is the way I was taught how this stuff worked, right? And how this stuff came together so that I would understand how and why our taijutsu is what it is, okay? So a new warrior, right, does not have the kind of skills that somebody who survived battle after battle after battle would have, right? Same kind of combat experience and all that kind of stuff, right? So what we want to do is try to engage the attacker or the opponent, right, out at a longer range, right? Don't let him get into me, okay? So if I can get him farther away from me, I'm safer, right? I can last a little longer on the battlefield, okay? So all the young bucks were given, okay? That's a nose for those of you who know my drawing. Halberd, spear, whatever, okay? Keep them at bay, okay? The longer you survive, the more battles you go through, the more scars you have, the more mileage you have on this machine, right? Perhaps the slower you are, right? But you might also be on horseback, whatever, right? There's all these other things. So older soldiers, right? One who's been around for a while, so this is a young guy, right? Could probably in his teens. Okay? When I say young guy, I don't mean like 20-something, 18 plus like in the West and all that. I'm talking 12 to 16, okay? So I'm going to give him something way longer. He can reach out there, okay? The longer somebody survives, makes it through these battles, right? More scars they have and all that, right? Now, he's got a sword, okay? Again, longer they survive, more battles they survive, the older they get, right? They make it past the ripe old age of 30, right? Maybe 25, okay? Average lifespan of a soldier. Just, we'll keep it on Western history for those of you in the U.S., right? The average lifespan of a male in the United States during our Revolutionary War, okay, was somewhere between 42 and 47. Okay. So at Valley Forge, when they asked this Baron von Steuben, who was brought in by Washington from the Prussian army to train the soldiers in drill and ceremony and respect and discipline and things like that, right? When he was asked, at what age can a soldier retire from the military? See if this number rings in your ear, right? At what age can they retire? He said 65. Does that sound familiar? Okay. 65. Yeah, you make it to 65, you can retire. The problem was that the average age was what? Somewhere between 42 and 47. Okay. It was a joke. It was just a number that was thrown out that was longer, right? The idea of retiring, what are you talking about, right? As long as you're useful, there's no retiring. Okay. Now everybody's set up like, oh man, if I stick it out in a job that I hate, right, this long, not only can I not ever have to work again, but they're going to pay me for doing nothing. Right? It's a whole different mindset, right? But anyway, right? Say you last longer, right? Next thing you know, you're this old guy, 50, 60, whatever, right? And now you're not out in the battlefield. Now you're back home at the village helping the women protect from whatever might be going on, okay? And so now what you might have is a short sword, right? You might have a short sword. You might have a tanto. You might have a jitte. You might have something, because you're not moving that well. Or you might have body weapon. Okay? Because when most people think of weapons, what do they think of? They think of spear and halberd and nunchucks and knives and whatever. Okay? How about you? How about your limbs? That kind of thing, right? So we're going to come back to this. This kind of looks like that thing where like caveman, Neanderthal, whatever, modern man, whatever, right? Kind of this way. But this is a kind of an age thing. Up to maturity, and then, I mean, this is still maturity, right? But as far as agility, so you got agility and speed and strength and all that, but not a whole lot of experience. You got a lot of experience, but you're starting to lose agility and strength and all that, right? So the bad guys getting closer, all that kind of stuff, right? And then you're losing speed, you're losing agility, right? So there's this transition, okay? So let's take a look at these ranges, right? And I know the title of the session was 3 ranges. We are going to focus on those 3, but let's take a look at all of them, okay? So we've got long range, right? Okay, we have long range, we have mid range, we have close range, right? We get all that, right? Long, mid, and close, okay? If we were looking at spear and whatnot as long range, we'd have a problem. I mean, it makes sense to a lot of people, right? Spear, long staff, whatever. You get long range, right? Sword, whatever, right? Mid range. Shoto, tanto, handheld items, right? Is close range, right? But we actually have something very different going on, okay? Long range are projectile weapons. And since the Japanese didn't throw spear, right, because they weren't javelin, right, not only because throwing your weapon away so somebody can pick it up and throw it back at you is not a good idea, but the average height of a warrior during the Sengoku Jidai Warring States period when our stuff was developed, right, was 4'2", okay, the height of a mid-sized child, right, that was an adult. Spear, halberd, between 7 and 9 feet long. Kind of got a weight distribution thing, and throwing it's not going to go that far. Okay, it's not a javelin. It's not this short thing. Okay, but they're projectile weapons. So think Yumiya, right? Think Kyudo, archery, right? We're launching these things, right? We're trying to thin out the ranks. Okay, so that actually puts spear and halberd, right? or pole weapons at mid-range. Okay, we're thinking combat, battle, right? That now puts sword, right, of whatever length, right? Could be spear or could be sword. It could be a jo, could be a hanbo, not less than a hanbo, right? So put jo, whatever. Okay, so that's close range, right? And then we have very close range. Okay, this is either small weapons. Okay, most people think tanto and stuff like that, but the way the Japanese during that time thought about short weapons, right? We're really looking at the shoto or the wakizashi. Okay, could be shoto, whatever, but typically it was taijutsu. Okay, if you're that close with something that small, punch him in the throat, right? So when we're looking at these ranges, right, what we're going to do today to narrow this down is we're going to get rid of that one. Okay, now I'm going to talk about projectile weapons. Okay, and the simple reason for that is, again, if I throw it, it's just like with ninja weapons, right? The shuriken, right, is often, how often is that called a throwing star? Okay, except the word shuriken doesn't mean throwing star. Okay, it means handheld blade. Okay, the D in the middle, right? The samurai had shuriken as well, just not what everybody thinks of. Okay, shuriken in that context is a hand thrown or hand flipped blade, and now we're looking at a shoto or like a short sword or a knife or something like that. That would have been thrown to distract him so that you could draw your long weapon and get it. Okay. The ninja know that the shuriken, right? It's a distraction weapon, right? Rarely will it kill. Wow, sensei, it might be dipped in poison. Yeah, imagine carrying a bunch of spiky things in a pouch or whatever, dipped in dung, which is one of the primary poisons, right? Or whatever, okay? And then you have to do a dive roll to get away from something, and it pokes you, okay? One of the most effective poisons back in the day was just to let the metal rust, okay? Because they didn't have tetanus shots, okay? Somebody gets cut with a rusted blade or whatever, lockjaw kicks in, it's a long agonizing death. You see that shit, somebody holds up a rusted blade, you're more likely to run than to have to deal with it, okay? So we're going to get rid of that one, okay? So now what we have are these ranges, right? But if you remember the pictures that I had up, nothing changed, okay? What I want you to understand is that the principles are the same across the board as the range changes. It doesn't matter if we're at long, mid-range, whatever you want to call it, right? We're at a closer range with a sword, or we're doing things with our taijutsu. The key principles are the same, right? Key principles are the same. And again, historically, for a lot of people, it went this way, right? But everything kind of had its own way of doing things, right? The development of taijutsu goes that way, okay? That's why spear, halberd, long staff, katana, shoto or wakizashi, jute, whatever, they all have, you're unarmed, right? They all have seigan no kamae or ichimonji no kamae or something that does that same thing, right? Which is the primary. Hatsumi Sensei has always said, if you can't do ichimonji no kamae, you can't do taijutsu, right? What the hell does he mean by that? Okay? Not just take up a form like it's a stance. What does that mean? Okay? And if you can't do yoko uruki, right, this sideways walking, or in the Koto school called kaniyuki, crab walking, right, then you can't do henka. See, this blows a lot of people's theories and bullshit right out of the water because they looked at pictures or they watched video and then they just made assumptions. Okay? So anyway, right? So let's take a look at these principles, right, that are holding everything together, right? Because the biggest aha moment that I had coming up through the ranks, because again, at the beginning of my training, right? I came out of training in more than a dozen different martial arts. And my training looked like those guys. Okay? So when I got involved in this art, it was a natural assumption or an understandable assumption to start looking at everything this way. Right? One of my biggest aha moments came when my teacher said, your kami are based on weapons work. Okay? Staff to the sword. Let me grab something here quickly. Little halberd, right? I know I'm really, really close here, but you can see to my waist, and that's all you need to see. Okay. So let's look at a kotoryu kami called bobi no kami. Okay. Bobi means defensive conventionally, but if you look at the way the kanji are written, okay, it translates as to prepare for an explosion. Okay. Doesn't matter if it's his or mine, right? So it's conventionally translated as defensive, but there's meaning behind this stuff. And if you don't clear away the mist or just take somebody else's word for it, you're not going to get to where things need to be, from my experience. Okay, you can do what you want, right? Okay, so in Bobi no Kami, just like in Gyoko Ryu Shoshin no Kami, used for doing the Sanshi, okay? The lead hand is out like this, right? The rear hand is a Boshiken or Shitoken, depending on which lineage you're in, right? And then it's placed. Let me move so that I'm not right there where my little name tag is, right? And it's this way, and the thumb is parallel to the floor. The number of people that I've seen putting it right here this way, because that's comfortable, right? You just bring your arm back, and it's here like you're drawing a pistol, okay? See where the thumb is pointing, okay? That's incorrect. It's not incorrect because of form. It's incorrect because you can't hold a weapon that way and have it be effective. Okay, so I'm going to come back to that in a minute, right? Let's look at these three principles for weapons use. Are there other ones? Yeah, but these are the three key pieces, okay? The first one is that the weapon stays between you and the bad guy. You and the opponent, okay? Stays between you and the opponent. Why? Right? Feeds into the next one, okay? The weapon is the shield. Okay? In Japanese martial arts, you don't have a whole lot of shields, right? There were a couple of shields that were developed along the way, but they were typically for archers. They were much smaller. They went on the lead arm, and they kept that guy alive a little bit longer when other volleys of arrows are coming in from the opponents to try to thin out the ranks, right, of those sending volleys in the other direction. Right? So it went on the midline to protect the life-sustaining organs so you can get off as many rounds as possible before, well, you take one or whatever, okay? So since they didn't have these shields, and also the Japanese belief, right, in everything from like reincarnation and spiritual transference and things like that, right, depending on whether we're coming from the shamanistic point of view or the Buddhist point of view, right, this idea of karma, right? If you left yourself wide open, well, universal justice says you're not going to last very long, right? And we're okay with that, okay? From a reincarnation, rebirth kind of perspective, well, you get a do-over, okay? Now, I'm not sure that I buy into all that stuff. However, the idea is that if this is all I have, then I need to hold that weapon in a way that makes it both easy for me to engage his targets, right? So the weapon staying between he and I both does this, and let's put something else in here, right? This is all over the scrolls. Allows you to take center, okay? You take center and force him to fight from the outside in, unless you're inviting him straight in which case, right, I've talked about this in other Whiteboard Wednesdays, where your kami is like an open bear trap. You're just waiting for him to step in, okay? But the weapon is the shield, right? So it doesn't matter if I'm holding in a guard position or I'm actually applying a strike or a cut. The angle of the strike and the cut and the way the weapon is positioned and held during that prevents his weapon from accidentally on purpose engaging with me, okay? So if I shift out of the way and do a cut to his neck and he drops away from me, but my weapon is in some odd position, as he falls, right, his sword can come up through the middle and take me out, right? So my cut needs to be positioned so that when that happens, right, the weapon is between he and I, so the worst that's going to happen to me is like a glancing shot, or I might lose a finger or something like that, okay? It's just like with your Hicho, okay? In Hicho, I don't know if you can see this, I'll readjust the camera here, right? In Hicho, let's see, I'm going to face the camera. So in Hicho, the ball of the foot goes, or the arch of the foot goes on the ball of the calf. So the knee is slightly turned in, but naturally, right? See how it covers the groin this way? There's way too many people doing this, or just arbitrarily picking it up this way. That's a target, right? There's reasons that things are where they are. One, you're taking center. If I'm here, it not only guards this, but my kick goes straight. If it's over here, I've got to come in, I've got to torque my hips. If it's this way, right? I don't have easy access to the targets. So this stays here so that when the target opens up, ski is easy, okay? But the weapon is the shield. And the third one, I've covered this in at least one episode on the Kukan, right? So for those of you who know what the Kukan is, right? Space of potential, okay? It's that space between he and I, where it's the edge of the combative space. It's the what I call the bubble, okay? Anything that gets put in there, the timing has to be right. Otherwise, it gets sacrificed. Okay? The rule of thumb is you don't put anything inside the Kukan that you're not willing to give up for the rest of your life. Okay? The Kukan begins at the leading edge of your weapon. Leading edge or tip of the weapon. So if I'm in Seigan, the Kukan starts here. The Kukan starts here, not here. Most people are trying to guard these, but they forget that these things can be accessed. Same with your weapon, okay? So if I'm holding this, right, and it's out there between he and I, and he can hit it, right? There's a lot of kata that start off with the attacker hitting this and you either neutralizing it or it moves you to another position, and then you need to counter the counter, right? Let me rechange the angle of the camera here, so stop looking like Frankenstein with the head chopped off. All right. So the Kukan is begins at the leading edge of the weapon. Okay. If you put your weapon inside the Kukan, then he can take advantage of it. He can use your weapon against you. Okay. You're not only protecting you, you have to protect your weapon as well. Okay. So let's go back to a little elevator music for your listening enjoyment, or not. Okay. All right. So before I write something else up there, let's go back to that little Bobi thing that I was doing. Bobi or Shoshin, right? So why is this correct, but this isn't? Why is this correct, but this isn't? This could be correct, right? But things start to change, okay? I'm going to put my hand, so you can see it. Where am I? There we go. Put my hand like the way a lot of people do this. All right? And then I'm going to put my staff in here this way. You don't need to see the whole thing to know where it's pointing. Okay? If I put my hand like this, see the channel that runs between my fingers? See it? I'm going to drop this. Bobi Shoshin. Okay? I'm going to take a look at some of this stuff next week when we take a look at Kamae not just being something to launch an attack from, but they're actually adaptive positions based on range using the same weapon. Next week, we're going to look at the long staff because it's a bigger model to look at, right? But let's look at this one. Okay? Got this, yes? Okay? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Again, right? So it doesn't matter if I have, right? If I've got my staff, halberd, whatever, okay? Shift to this side, just easier to fit around my little lettering there, right? Shift this a little bit. Sorry, I don't have a cameraman, right? So from here, right? 1, 2, sword, nay? 3, 3, okay? 1, 2, 3. Right? Your kami are weapons. Okay? So pole arms, we'll call it for today long range. Sword, blade, short stick, whatever, mid range. You, close range. Okay? And again, maybe you didn't get the lessons this way. Maybe people are contradicting that, right? If you think this is valuable, give it a try. You might discover, like I did, that as soon as you start looking at your taijutsu from the perspective of weapons, what most people think of as weapons, your understanding of the kami and the use of it, and the number of techniques that you will know just greatly expand, okay? If I understand that this, right, this, okay, is receiving with the tsuka of a sword in my belt, and I'm drawing it and cutting him, everything changes. If I'm holding, if I'm in doko and I've got that wakizashi or shoto where I'm flashing light into his face, and then I'm coming in and I'm doing my shito as if I had that shoto and I'm lopping his head off, the power in your strike changes, your accuracy changes, the weapon stays between me and him. So instead of doing this, which leaves a big open window, I understand why it's like this. Because the weapon is the shield, right? So therein lies the issue, right? Or therein lies the lesson, right? Just going to kind of wrap it up at this one, right? Again, look at your, try to take a look at things from most people's perspective, backwards. Look at weapons and back up. What's happening, or what you'll see, what you may see, right? Because you're now seeing the connection, is that you don't have to do more than slight adaptation with your taijutsu to accommodate weapons. Or looking from weapons this way, you understand why it's important to have your limbs in certain positions and why the movement of the limbs and the movement of the body is a certain way so that you don't expose targets on the way in, right? You'll be more respectful of the kukan, right? Well, I don't put this in there, but do you, right? Because if you're only paying attention to the conventional targets that most people pay attention to, then you're missing the fact, or you're all playing the same game in the dojo, you're missing the fact that somebody can knock this thing out of the way or attack the lead limb to get to the other targets, okay? We need to think less like martial artists, less like people trying to learn a martial art to get a belt or to get recognition or whatever, and more like warriors who understand the gravity of failure on the battlefield. Regardless if that's a literal battlefield, a back alley, or your bedroom. Nothing changes, right? So, again, this is part one, right? We're going to be working with these things. We're going to be working with the spear, the sword, and our taijutsu, linking these things together, actually taking a look at things from the perspective of different names for different kata, but it's the exact same form, okay? During our Friday virtual training class. So if you go on over there, you can take a look at that and get signed up for it. And if not, it's no big deal, right? If you're on YouTube, you can always just stay on the channel, jump around, take a look at some of the other lessons that are going on, refer to some of these other things that are back there. Or if you're interested in taking things to the next level, go on over to onlineninjaacademy.com and take a look at some of the programs that we have. We just had 2-3 people in the last couple of days just sign up for the online black belt training program. It's a do-it-yourself kind of thing, but that's where they jumped in. Doesn't involve the same kind of coaching that my inner circle guys get, but it's there and I can help them out, right? So if you're ready for that next step, great. If not, there's plenty of other training videos on the YouTube channel, right, that you can just binge watch to your heart's glee, unless you're only looking for entertainment, right? If you have the attention span that they're now telling us that people who are binge watching things on social media, if your attention span is 8 to 9 seconds, I'm sure that less and less things are satisfying anymore, but you're not going to get a lot. Most of my lessons, right, are lessons for students that actually want to learn. Okay, that's it. I'll talk to everybody again next week. Next week is part 2. I hope to come at it from a whole different perspective, but it'll still be the same thing. 3 ranges of weapons combat. I'll talk to you next time. Be safe, train hard. Hope to see you soon.